Toxic masculinity. Chances are most of you listening will have a different interpretation of that term. For some, it represents the worst aspects of manhood and all the negative things society teaches men to be. For others, it's a wholesale attack on men that makes them feel angry. Well, I want to talk to you about a third way, a form of masculinity that is not toxic or fragile. It's both empathetic and protective, strong and yet vulnerable, the masculinity of anime men. By the end of this video, I promise that I will do my absolute darndest to prove to you that the protagonists of shonen anime are very much a model of masculinity that we can all look to as examples of all the best things men can be, and show you that the likes of Luffy, Tanjiro, Deku, Gon, Naruto, and many others are exactly the kind of guys that we could all do with having more of in our lives. We'll focus in this video on 6 key attributes divided into what I'll call the 3 pillars of anime masculinity. And let's start with one of the most important, the ability to make friends and have empathy. If you look at basically any major shonen anime, the main character is almost always good at one thing: making friends. Their power levels vary, personality traits and status in the world can all be different, but the one thing they almost all share in common is that they are great at making friends. In fact, within their story worlds, they're almost always the most exceptional at drawing people to them. Everyone who meets them is compelled and wants to join them or root for them, and usually this is because of their outstanding kindness and empathy. Now, as we discuss some details, be prepared for potential spoilers ahead. Luffy has half the world of One Piece rooting for him, even though he's technically an outlaw. Naruto goes from being an outcast in his village to being elected the equivalent of their president, the Hokage, someone everyone trusts. Deku is able to turn the entire hero world and even the civilian population into full-throated supporters of his. And they're all able to do this because they genuinely care about other people, often above their own needs. More on that later. They go out of their way to reach out to people, even those who are normally shunned by others. They take the time to get to know people and see who they really are, and they will often fight and break through barriers to make the connection with another person. And what I really love is that they don't just reserve this kindness for good people. They extend their empathy to even the bad guys. Tanjiro cries for the demons he has to kill because he understands the tragic hand they're dealt. Deku refuses to kill his arch-enemy Shigaraki because he believes he's just another human who can be saved. And amazingly, our protagonists often get through to their villains as well. Naruto is able to talk things out with Pain, who uses the last of his life to revive the people he had just killed in the previous fight. Mob from Mob Psycho converts the main villain of the first season into an empathetic person who seeks to redeem himself for his crimes. This, in between, twice redeeming the evil spirit Dimple. These outcomes are so much more profound than just beating the bad guy. To be able to turn a misguided person onto a path of kindness requires a level of empathy that we should all wish to aspire to, even though it's so incredibly hard sometimes. But all of this is only possible because anime protagonists are always looking for the best in others, and they're always trying to find a new friend wherever they can. Now at this point, I think it's only right that we mention that while men get all this nuance and complexity, women in anime are dealt an incredibly bad hand. If they're not being sexually harassed or physically attacked, they're often just objects of fan service, thrown in with increasingly ridiculous body proportions to titillate male audiences. There are of course notable exceptions, but by and large, they're not treated like equal human beings. But ironically, while the second-class status of female characters is one universal thing between anime and Western media, the way they present men could not be more different. What we just described about anime men could not contrast more sharply with the image of action heroes we normally see in Hollywood and Western media. Usually male protagonists, and especially those who are supposedly heroes, are lone wolves. Far from making friends easily, they tend to resent the idea of connecting with other people. They struggle to get along with most others, and even when they're forced to spend time with some new characters over the course of the film, they're usually incredibly begrudging about all of this. At some point, they also tend to push all their friends away, usually before the climax where there's a big falling out, only for the friends to make a triumphant return during the final fight, and all is forgiven. For me, this is the kind of stuff that is downstream of toxic masculinity. We live in a world where suicide is the biggest killer of men under the age of 50, and where 3/4 of all suicides are men. Men are much more likely to be isolated and much less likely to seek help when they're suffering from severe mental health issues. Human beings are social animals. We need to form close connections with people to feel good about ourselves. That is how we are hardwired. But these ideas that men should be loners, that men shouldn't pride themselves on making friends and being kind or friendly, these are things that, to me, are really hurting men. It's making men isolated and leaving them without support systems. All of this is another attribute of what anime men do so well. They might be heroes who strive to fight and win, but they never fight alone. They always bring their friends with them, and they're always supported and often even rescued by their friends. And yet none of this compromises their masculinity or sense of self. They're still respected and loved for asking for help, and in fact, it only makes them that much more admirable. Because in reality, no one can do it alone. We are born helpless babies, and from our birth to our old age, we need others to help us, just the way we should be helping others. And that leads us to the second pillar of masculinity, what our anime men will do to help others. The problem with gender roles is that they can become incredible burdens. When you don't fit the idea of what a man or woman should be, it can cause incredible pain and suffering, and it's why allowing people to be whatever they want to be without prescriptive labels of things they have to do is a better way of operating society. But that doesn't mean that all the values assigned to gender roles are inherently bad. And I want to talk about two that are traditionally associated with masculinity that I think are worth striving towards. Our anime men are almost always loyal and protective. Gon and Killua are fiercely protective of each other, repeatedly putting their own lives on the line to save the other. Luffy defies the literal world government and liberates entire countries to save, help, or protect his friends. Yuji from Jujutsu Kaisen explicitly lives his life to help others, the only real motivating goal he has in life. The role of protector is not one that is fit for every man, or for that matter, every person, but it's something that we can all admire and respect. And it's not just that they're physically protective of their friends. Violence is easy to resort to. Fighting over something and then claiming it's for a noble reason is one of the oldest lies in the history of the world. And for a citation, see the vast majority of wars throughout human history. And again, if you look at Hollywood movies, the trope of a hurt male loner who has lost his family or some loved one and then goes on some sort of warpath in response is an old and harmful one. In fact, it goes as far back as the tradition of storytelling in human history, whether that's the Bible or Elizabethan revenge tragedies, something I discuss in this video here. But these are all stories where the violence is the focus. It's simply about the man's anger being expressed with some level of justification, but the anger is all we see. What's different about anime men is that their loyalty doesn't begin and end with enacting violence. They are there for their friends in the ups and the downs, the joys and the sorrow. For every dramatic disaster or erupting conflict that they have to deal with, they also want to help their friends fulfill their dreams and bring joy into their lives. Warning, there's about to be some specific One Piece spoilers ahead, so if you don't want to know what happens 900 episodes in, which is understandable, then skip to the timestamp you see on screen now. In one of the most recent One Piece arcs, Luffy arrives in the Wano Kingdom and meets a young girl named Tama. The land of Wano is under the rule of a tyrant named Kaido, who is blatantly exploiting the land and its people for his own profits. Tama, like most of the natives, lives in poverty and barely gets by weaving hats to sell. But despite this, in a truly moving scene, Tama cooks some rice for Luffy, the rice she could only afford as a treat for her birthday. Not realizing the scarcity of it, Luffy eats it all, and it's only afterwards that he learns how precious that rice was, as Tama falls ill from drinking the polluted river water to quench her hunger. He then rushes her to get treated, and finally gets her a proper meal, which has her moved to tears from how good it is. It is then that Luffy vows that he will create a land where no one goes hungry, and she can eat to her heart's content. Of course, this does involve him going to war and beating Kaido in a physical conflict. But the key distinction is that neither Luffy nor the story are motivated by this or end at this point. In many stories, the villain, like Kaido, is the main goal, and we just need a reason to fight him. Then once he's defeated, we move on with a very perfunctory nod at best of what's happening elsewhere. But a story like One Piece always centers around the people of a land, not just the villains that oppress them. True to his promise, Luffy liberates the Wano Kingdom and ensures that Tama can eat to her heart's content, and this is his main motivation throughout. When the conflict is over, the important thing we focus on, and the reason why Luffy is so beloved in the world of One Piece, is that the people of the land are left happy once more, and we get the payoff of seeing Tama eating to her heart's content. So what I enjoy about the protectiveness of anime men is that they're not just violent for the sake of violence, they're people who are looking to bring joy first and foremost. The people they're trying to protect are not just nameless characters or people we never actually meet, i.e. plot devices. They're fully fleshed people that we spend time with on screen and get to know. Because for our protagonists, loyalty is the motivation, not anger, even if anger is sometimes a part of it all. This goes back to the idea of empathy, even for your enemies. You can't tell one-dimensional stories of beating up irredeemable bad guys if you actually show their humanity, and if our protagonist has empathy for them. That's why the motivation isn't as simple as, I gotta beat up this bad guy who made me angry. It goes deeper than that. This brings up another key distinction. Anger is not the only emotion that our protagonists show. It's just one of a range. And that leads us to our third pillar, the ability to be vulnerable and expressive. Whoever said boys don't cry was not only stupid, but completely wrong. It should go without saying that boys and men do cry. But unfortunately, I do have to say it, because people often make these incorrect assumptions. But we're human, for God's sake. Men feel elated, they feel yearning, they feel sadness, they feel depression, they feel confused. And what anime men do so well is that they express all of these emotions. When they're happy, they leap for joy. When they're scared, they hide behind their friends. And most importantly, when they're sad, they cry. One of the worst, most harmful tropes in Hollywood is the idea of the man who is too manly to shed tears. If something bad happens, then he can and should only express anger. Anger is the only legitimate emotion allowed to men. And in extreme circumstances, if his family dies or he loses everything he holds dear, he's allowed the grace of one manly tear trickling down his cheek emotionlessly. Pardon my French, but f*** that. Men should feel comfortable openly weeping when tragic things occur, or in shedding tears of joy or relief, especially if it's in the comfortable surrounding of their friends. And that's what the protagonists of anime do again and again and again. Famously, Solo Leveling, one of the most popular anime of the last few years, features a protagonist who is, for all intents and purposes, an undefeatable badass, or so he certainly becomes. But even in this show, where our hero spends most of the second season just straight up destroying his opponents without breaking a sweat, there are two important points. And again, specific Solo Leveling spoiler ahead, so skip to the following timestamp if you don't want to hear it. Firstly, his main motivation is to cure his mother of the disease that has her in a coma. Once he achieves this, he then learns that he has a responsibility to protect others too, which causes him to leap into action and ties in with the idea of loyalty and empathy. But in a scene that became controversial, when he finally cures his mother and she wakes up from her coma, Jin Woo cries. And not one manly tear shed by a badass, but full-on ugly crying. Sadly, it was considered controversial because a lot of Western anime fans in particular felt this compromised his masculinity, that it made him look weak. In a season that was wildly popular and lauded, this was an episode that received a lot of downvotes and negative commentary. But to me, this just exposes how warped the perception is of these things among Western audiences, and how we still have such a long way to go in our expectations of men. Your mother, the person who you hold most dear in the world in the case of Jin Woo, who you fear may be lost to you forever, wakes up from a coma. And if you can't cry here, then when can you cry? Of course, the answer is that for some people, men should never cry. But as we've already spoken about, this is a ludicrous ideology, and one that is demonstrably harming men. He absolutely should cry, and in doing so, he gives us the audience another reason to empathize with and feel his emotions. It shows us that this character is human, not just some abstract idea. This is why I think all these facets of anime men are so important, because they're not only admirable, but much needed as representations for men on screen. And if we combine everything we've discussed, I'd have to summarize by saying that anime protagonists are just nice guys. And I really appreciate that. Let's be real for a moment. The world can be a really bleak place, now more than ever. The internet is often horrible to be on, and not a day goes by on social media when you don't see angry yelling and awful people saying just the most heinous things. I don't want my media to show me more horrible people. I don't need dark, edgy, emotionless tough guys. There are some great works of fiction depicting such characters, but I don't want it to be the default. I don't want for young men in particular to have their role models on screen be some angry dickhead who we should like, not because he's likable, but just because he gets the job done. I love that anime heroes are just kind people. I love that they strive to look after others and go above and beyond to help and save people. I love that they just want to make friends. I love that they're cheery and want to bring joy to others. They're as close to altruistic as you can realistically get. And I'm so much more happy watching a show like that. Because I want to root for people like this. I want to see them win, not because I want them to assert their power and dominance over others as the strongest person ever, but because if put in charge, the worlds they create would be full of kindness and empathy. And that's a goal we can all appreciate, I hope. So for that reason, no matter our own gender identity, I hope we can all take inspiration from the beautiful masculinity of anime men. Because the qualities they showcase are ones that every single person on Earth would benefit from having more of. And I include myself in that. It's not realistic to be exactly like them. We're human and they're fictional characters. But I absolutely think media gives us things to aspire to, things to believe in. And I'd like to believe in a world where masculinity means empathy, means kindness, and it means just trying our best to see the good in everyone we meet. Okay, one last thing before you go. If you've enjoyed this video all the way to this point, then would you consider supporting me on Patreon? I try to make all my videos without throwing in ads from shitty sponsors who want you to buy their scammy products and services. But doing so means I'm entirely reliant on YouTube revenue and the support of my patrons. Patrons not only help me keep the lights on, but also get additional benefits for themselves. We actually just had our first ever Soak Patreon monthly call where I got to speak with one of my highest tier patrons, Nenananas, about everything Soak and media related. So shout out to them, and I'll be expanding that to more Patreon tiers in the near future. Thank you to my other current patrons, and for all you Soak fans out there, I've actually now created a Discord server where you can join and discuss all your favorite media with like-minded people, and get updates from me about what's happening with the channel, and hey, just hang out. Also, a bit of Soak lore, but I used to be a full-time streamer, and while I don't make gaming content anymore, I do still stream on Twitch for fun sometimes, so if you enjoy chill RPG games, or just want to hang out, then I'd love for you to join me. The link to all of this is in the video description. But that's it for now. Thank you for watching this video, and I hope I'll see you again very soon.